Easter Sunday always smelled of lilies and lemon polish in my house. This year it smelled like performance. The marble floors had been waxed to mirror perfection, and the laughter echoing through my dining room didn't sound familiar anymore. It sounded curated. My daughter-in-law, Cassandra, stood by the 12-foot oak table holding her phone like a microphone, her voice soft yet performative for the 200,000 strangers watching her live stream. She turned in my direction and smiled a smile meant for the camera, not for me. "Elegance needs an update," she said, glancing at the portrait of my late husband on the wall. "Even this dining room feels like a museum." The guests chuckled politely. The cello music faltered for half a beat. I walked to my seat, the one at the head of the table, the seat Thomas had chosen for me 30 years ago, when we hosted our first charity dinner. Cassandra's tone brightened. "Mom, that seat feels outdated. Maybe let the new generation host." The room went still. Forks hovered. Glass stems trembled in fingers that didn't know whether to lift or hide. I smiled. "Of course, dear. You seem to have quite the audience." She laughed, relieved, and turned back to her phone. I took my time settling into the chair to her right, pulling my napkin across my lap with a deliberate calm that made the air tighten. Every eye followed me. Every breath waited. Cassandra started introducing the new era of elegance, her words spilling rehearsed gratitude to sponsors, stylists, and the visionary women of her brand. My name wasn't among them. The sound of my phone buzzed softly in my purse. A message window opened from Lucas Reed, my financial advisor. I typed 4 words, "Freeze the April wire." My fingers didn't shake. Cassandra raised her glass for a toast. "To legacy that evolves," guests echoed her. I lifted my own glass, the crystal reflecting the flicker of candlelight, thinking of Thomas's voice years ago when he'd said, "Power isn't taken, Maggie. It's transferred by silence." I sipped. Silence tonight would do more than any speech. The servers entered with the main course. Cassandra made sure her camera caught the plates, the cutlery, the guests' reactions. She had turned generosity into content. It wasn't philanthropy anymore, it was branding. I watched her pass my old silver trays like props. I caught Lucas's reflection in the mirror across the room, standing discreetly by the archway. He gave a small nod. The wire transfer was gone. $200,000 erased in the time it took for Cassandra to mispronounce the name of a scholarship recipient. She didn't notice. She was too busy narrating her own importance. Then, as dessert approached, her tone changed. "Let's get something special for the stream," she told the waiter, tapping her card to pay for an extra case of champagne. A beat of silence. The device beeped once, then again. Declined. A flicker crossed her perfect face. "Try again," she said lightly. Declined. The guests pretended not to hear, but the air thickened. Someone coughed. Martha, my housekeeper, stood frozen by the door, her lips pressed tight to hide her knowing smile. Cassandra whispered to the waiter, then turned toward me, still smiling but her pupils sharp. "Mom did the bank." I lifted my glass again, meeting her gaze without blinking. "Dessert is ready," I said. Her phone camera was still on, streaming every twitch of her face. For once she didn't know what to perform. I could almost hear the comments flooding her live chat viewers, speculating screens, capturing hashtags forming. The hum of the cello returned slower now, as if the musicians sensed the tension. I reached for my fork, cutting into the lemon soufflé with the same precision I'd used in every negotiation of my life. The guests began to talk again, softly at first, then louder, filling the silence Cassandra couldn't control. I looked at her plate, untouched, the gold rim trembling in her hand. She was learning in real time what entitlement feels like when the current stops. I thought of the line Thomas once wrote me in a letter before he died. "If they ever mock your age, let them. They'll learn what longevity really means." By the time dessert was served, Cassandra's smile had hardened into glass. The live stream had ended without her signing off. The house had never been so quiet beneath the music. The lilies smelled sweeter. The air felt lighter. Her $200,000 allowance had quietly vanished, and so had her illusion of control. Charleston smelled of wisteria that Thursday, 3 days before Easter. the kind of sweetness that clings to the air even when the house is too quiet. I had spent the morning reviewing the guest list for the Vale Scholars' Dinner, circling names that had supported our foundation for decades. Every year, the dinner marked both remembrance and renewal. But this year, it felt like performance art waiting to go wrong. Cassandra was in the ballroom directing 2 decorators she had hired from Atlanta. The women wore white linen jumpsuits and moved like stagehands under her command. She pointed at the floral arrangements I had ordered and said, "Remove the lilacs. Too grandmotherly. We need white roses, all white. It photographs better." I stood at the doorway and watched the chaos unfold. Those lilacs came from the garden. "Thomas planted the year we married," I said. She did not look up from her tablet. "Yes, but your era loved clutter. Minimalism means progress." Her tone was airy, rehearsed the way she spoke when she was half talking to her camera crew. She wanted everything to look elevated for her Easter weekend content. I turned away before she could see the disappointment on my face. Martha followed me into the study with her hands covered in dust from the flower vases. She had the movers carry out the old Lewis chairs from the dining room, Martha whispered. Said they were too heavy for the new look. I froze. She touched the Louis XVI set. "She said it's clutter," Martha answered softly. I walked to the window. The Charleston sunlight spilled through the magnolia trees, and for a moment I saw the reflection of Thomas's portrait on the glass. He had loved those chairs, had imported them from a Paris auction after our 10th anniversary. I said nothing. I simply picked up my notebook and wrote down the date and the description of the chairs. I had learned long ago that silence records louder than anger. That evening, after Cassandra left for her spa appointment, I opened my laptop and searched eBay out of instinct. There it was, authentic Louis XVI dining set Charleston pickup only. The seller's name was listed as C. Vale. The bidding price sat at $14,000. My pulse did not quicken. I took a screenshot and sent it to my personal email. The next morning, an automated message arrived from the auction site confirming the listing. I printed it and placed it in a folder marked Household. I did not tell Ethan. He would defend her as always and call it a misunderstanding. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Evelyn Crane, an old friend from the Charleston Women's Circle. "Margaret," she said, hesitating. "I saw something odd in the Gazette's charity section. It lists Cassandra Vale as director of the Vale Foundation. Did you step down?" I felt the air leave my chest slowly. "No, I did not," I replied. "Then perhaps it was a typo," she said, quickly, embarrassed. "Anyway, we're all looking forward to the dinner." I thanked her and ended the call. My fingers rested on the desk, tracing the edge of the wood Thomas had polished himself decades ago. Cassandra had taken more than furniture. She had taken authorship. The thought didn't anger me so much as it steadied something inside. That afternoon, she burst through the door in a cloud of perfume and shopping bags. "Mom," she said brightly, "I had this idea. We could rename the gala. Something modern like Legacy Reimagined. It would make headlines." "Headlines are not the goal," I said. "Scholarships are." She laughed lightly as if I had told a quaint joke. "You still think like an accountant. Branding is impact now." She kissed my cheek in a rush of synthetic vanilla and disappeared upstairs. I sat alone in the parlor as the afternoon light softened. On the side table lay an old ledger, Thomas's handwriting still neat and precise. He had once told me, "Keep the books clean, Maggie. Numbers never lie, even when people do." I opened the ledger and wrote down the date again beside the word chairs. The pen ink bled slightly into the paper. Martha entered with tea. "You want me to tell her to stop changing things, ma'am?" "No," I said. "Let her finish. Every stage needs its set." Later that night, I checked my email one last time. There was a message from Lucas Reed, my advisor, confirming that the quarterly transfer to Cassandra's personal account would be ready on April 1st, as usual. I replied with a single sentence, "Hold until further instruction." Then I closed the laptop and turned to the framed photo of Thomas. His eyes, calm and distant, met mine with the same patience that had carried him through decades of negotiation. I was never outdated, Tom, I whispered. Just patient. Outside, the garden lights flickered on one by one, illuminating the path to the gate. Cassandra's SUV pulled into the driveway, music blasting from open windows. She laughed loudly into her phone, telling someone about how she was transforming the old Vale house into something relevant. I listened from the window until the laughter faded upstairs. Relevance, I thought, was the new word for disrespect. In 3 days, the house would be filled with guests again, and she would have her stage. She believed I was too old to play the lead. I smiled to myself, the kind of small smile that carries both sorrow and certainty. The performance had already begun. Would you stay silent if someone erased your name? Comment below. The Charleston Gazette arrived early that Friday, the paper folded neatly at my doorstep, smelling faintly of ink and damp grass. I picked it up the way one picks up a letter they did not expect but already dread. The headline across the culture section read, "Influencer Cassandra Vale, the modern face of Southern philanthropy." Her picture took the entire top half of the page. She was standing in front of the Vale Foundation banner, wearing white, one hand on her hip, the other holding a champagne flute. Behind her, blurred in the background, hung a portrait of Thomas and me from 30 years ago. The caption beneath it read, "Cassandra Vale, redefining legacy for a digital age." I sat at the kitchen table and read the first paragraph twice. It opened with her quote, "Mrs. Vale taught me grace, but I teach relevance." The words were sugar-coated arrogance. She had turned my mentorship into a stepping stone, my patience into her brand. The journalist described her as the bridge between old Southern wealth and modern influence. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the bitterness settle, where anger might have been. Martha came in with a tray of toast and saw the paper. "Oh dear," she murmured. "That picture was taken in your ballroom." "Yes," I said, folding the paper carefully, without permission. She watched me for a moment and then asked, "You want me to tell the Gazette there was a mistake?" "No," I said. Let her headline breathe. I placed the folded paper inside a cream envelope, sealed it, and wrote Lucas Reed's name on the front. When the courier arrived, I handed it to him and said, "Deliver to his office today." By noon, Cassandra was online again, live streaming from the dining room. I could hear her voice echoing through the hallways. "We're redecorating the legacy," she said, panning her camera across the portraits of generations past. "Mrs. Vale keeps old trophies, but I want to give this house a future." I stood at the top of the staircase, unseen, listening to her perform sincerity. She gestured at Thomas's antique clock, the same one he had wound every Sunday morning for 40 years, and laughed lightly. "So many relics," she said. The comments on her stream poured in hearts and clapping emojis, filling the screen. "A modern queen," someone wrote. I went back to my study. The quiet there felt heavier now, as if the house itself were holding its breath. My phone buzzed at 2 in the afternoon. It was an email from the event planner for the Easter Gala. The subject line read, "Updated host information." I opened it. The first line said, "Please confirm your attendance, Mrs. Vale. The event will be hosted by Cassandra Vale." I read it twice, then a third time. The sentence was polite, factual, final. I looked at the framed certificate of incorporation for the Vale Foundation on the wall. My signature was still there, dated May 1992. Nothing had changed except the illusion. I printed the email and placed it beside the Gazette article. The phone rang again, this time from Evelyn. "Margaret, darling," she began, hesitant. "I saw the news. Cassandra's really doing quite a rebrand, isn't she?" "So it seems," I replied. "Well, at least she's keeping the family name alive," she said, trying to sound encouraging. I smiled, though she could not see it. Yes, alive and monetized. That evening, when Cassandra returned from her meeting, she burst through the front door, glowing under her ring light. "Mom," she called out, "did you see the article?" The response is incredible. The foundation's traffic is up 200%. She didn't notice the newspaper missing from the kitchen table. "You're welcome," she added with a grin. "We're trending." "So I hear," I said. "Congratulations." She came closer. her heels clicking on the marble floor. "You know, Mom, people love stories about transformation. They want to see how tradition evolves. You should be happy I'm keeping it relevant." "Relevance," I said softly, "isn't always progress." She laughed, dismissing it. "That's the difference between us. You see preservation, I see evolution." Then she kissed my cheek and floated upstairs, already answering messages. The house felt larger once her footsteps faded. I sat in the library, the air still carrying her perfume. On the desk lay the ledger, the one I had begun updating again. I opened it to a clean page and wrote the date, then one line, April 2024, relevance replaces respect. My pen did not pause. At 7, Lucas called. His voice was calm, the tone of a man used to careful wording. "Mrs. Vale, I received your envelope. I assume you saw the Gazette I did," I said, "and the article was not a surprise. Shall we make any statement?" "No, we'll let her headline have its moment." "Understood," he said. There was a pause. "However, you should know she has been using the foundation accounts for decor purchases, labeling them as promotional expenses." I leaned back in my chair. "Do we have receipts, all documented?" "Good," I said. "Then we'll begin transferring administrative rights back to my office. Quietly. You want it effective immediately?" "Yes, effective tonight." He hesitated. "Mrs. Vale, that means removing her digital access to the donation platform." "Precisely," I said. "Let her find out the way she finds everything online." I hung up and looked around the library. The shadows stretched long across the carpet. Thomas's portrait seemed to watch from the wall, the light catching on his glasses. I whispered, "We'll let her enjoy her headline." Outside the garden, lights flickered on, and somewhere upstairs, Cassandra's laughter carried through her phone speaker. She was still talking to her followers about legacy reimagined. I closed the ledger, stood, and turned off the lamp. Have you ever been replaced in your own story? Tell me below. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of light Charleston only gives before Easter soft gold, filtering through lace curtains and the faint sound of bells from St. Philip's drifting across the garden. I sat at my writing desk in the drawing room, 3 thick cream envelopes laid out before me. The house was quiet except for the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock behind me, its pendulum marking each decision with a whisper. Cassandra was at a photo shoot downtown for a lifestyle magazine, giving me the kind of silence I needed. The first invitation I addressed in careful cursive to Mr. Daniel Crow, the culture columnist from the Gazette. He had written kindly about the foundation years before Cassandra discovered hashtags. The second was to Ruth Hawthorne, a lawyer from Charleston who specialized in nonprofit governance. She had handled our estate filings since Thomas passed. The third was to Lucas Reed. For each name, I paused before sealing the envelope, letting the ink dry completely. The sound of the sealing wax dripping was like a heartbeat. I did not tell Martha whom I was inviting. I wanted no whispers, no premature revelations. When the clock struck 4, I folded my glasses and leaned back, letting the faint hum of the city fill the space. The Easter dinner had always been a tradition, but this year it would become something else entirely. It would become a mirror. In that mirror, Cassandra would finally see herself. Around 6, I heard Ethan's car in the driveway. He rarely came alone these days. He appeared in the doorway of my study, still wearing his business suit, though his tie hung loose. "Mom," he said cautiously, "we need to talk." He looked tired, his eyes darting toward the desk where the invitations lay. "Cassandra told me you're upset about the article." She didn't mean to overstep. I closed the ledger in front of me. She didn't overstep Ethan. She replaced. He sighed, running his hands through his hair. "You've both got to stop turning everything into a battle. She's trying to modernize the brand, that's all." The word brand hung in the air, like an insult. "And what does modernizing entail?" I asked. He hesitated, then spoke too quickly. "She's been looking into selling a few of the older pieces. Some of the paintings may be the silver tea set. She said they don't fit the image she's building. She wants clean lines, Mom." I let the silence stretch until he looked down. She's already listed 2 items privately," he added quietly. "I told her not to, but she said it's for the foundation's visibility." My voice stayed even. "So she's selling family history to buy attention." He shifted uncomfortably. "Don't make it sound ugly. She's trying." "Ethan," I said softly, "you can't redecorate integrity." He looked at me for a long moment as if hoping I would relent, but I only folded my hands. "Let her decorate her downfall," I said finally. He swallowed hard, nodded once, and left. The door clicked shut behind him. At 8 that evening, the house glowed under the lamplight, its silence deep enough to hear the ocean breeze through the magnolia leaves. I walked to the sideboard where the family stationery was kept. In the top drawer lay a small black box locked with a brass key. Inside were the trust documents and the authorization forms Lucas had prepared years ago. I opened them slowly, the pages still crisp. I signed a short letter granting temporary administrative control of the Vale Foundation back to my personal office. The pen moved smoothly. Years of financial work had trained my hand to stay steady no matter what emotion churned beneath. After sealing the documents, I called Lucas. "Everything is ready," I said. He did not ask what I meant. "The transfer forms are on my desk, Mrs. Vale," he replied. "Do you wish to proceed with the freeze?" "Yes," I said, "the April wire. It will be due in 48 hours. Understood. I'll execute the hold and flag it discreetly. Cassandra won't be notified until the transaction attempts to post." "Perfect." There was a pause, the kind that carries respect. "You want me to attend Sunday's dinner?" he asked. "Yes. Bring a copy of the statement, and bring Ruth Hawthorne as well. She'll need to witness something." After hanging up, I returned to the invitations and tied them with a thin silk ribbon. Martha appeared in the doorway carrying a tray of tea. "Still up, ma'am?" she asked gently. "Almost done." She set the tray down and looked at the envelopes. "Guests for Sunday." "A few," I said, "just people who appreciate authenticity." She smiled faintly. "That's a rare trait these days." "It always has been," I replied. She nodded and left me alone again. The house creaked softly, the old wood settling as night deepened. By 10, I moved through the rooms Cassandra had transformed over the past month. The white roses she insisted upon had already begun to brown at the edges. The minimalist furniture looked cold against the antique crown molding. I stood in the middle of the parlor and imagined the look on her face when the transfer declined, when she realized her empire was built on borrowed grace. I walked upstairs to my bedroom and opened the drawer of my nightstand. Inside was a letter I had written earlier that week, dated April 5th. It read, "To whom it may concern. Effective, immediately all discretionary transfers under the Vale family allowance are suspended pending review." I signed it again, the ink darker this time, and placed it in the top drawer of my desk. The clock struck 11. The steady rhythm of it echoed through the corridor. I whispered to the empty hallway, "Tomorrow civility meets consequence." The words hung there like a prayer. Outside, a storm was building over the harbor, the kind that brings rain so fine it feels like mist. I could almost hear Thomas's voice in the wind, calm and deliberate, telling me that grace was not submission, it was strategy. I closed the curtains and turned off the lamp. The desk gleamed in the dark, the 3 sealed invitations resting in a perfect row. Would you confront her tonight or wait for the perfect moment? Candlelight washed the walls in a soft glow that made the portraits look almost alive, and the guests drifted in, wearing pastels that matched the lilies Martha had arranged along the table. Photographers moved discreetly near the doorway, their lenses catching the reflections on the silver and the shimmer of glass. The cellist tuned in the corner, drawing a slow note that steadied the room, and I felt Charleston breathe outside the open windows, salt air and spring warmth weaving through the curtains. Cassandra stood beneath the chandelier with a microphone the planner had provided, though she hardly needed it. "Welcome to the new era of elegance," she announced, her voice trained and bright, each syllable floating toward the cameras as if the sentence had already been rehearsed 100 times. She raised a hand like a hostess on a stage, guiding servers and smiles with the same motion. Guests applauded politely. The event had begun. I walked to the head of the table, the place where Thomas had always insisted I sit, not out of vanity, but out of order. Chairs tell stories, he used to say. People either honor them or try to rewrite them. I rested my fingertips on the carved armrests and began to lower myself. "That is my seat," Mom Cassandra said, still smiling for the room. We agreed I would host. The air thinned. Conversations cut off mid-word as if an unseen hand had pressed pause. The faint clatter of silver stopped, and even the cellist lifted his bow in silence. Across the table, Evelyn looked down at her napkin. A young donor glanced toward the photographers, unsure whether to pretend nothing had happened. I could feel every eye settle on me and then slide to Cassandra and then back again like a tide, unsure of which shore to kiss. I held her gaze. The smile on her face was pleasant, almost kind, the way a teacher smiles while correcting a slow student. "By all means, dear," I said, and stepped to the chair at her right. I smoothed my skirt and placed my napkin in my lap with a calm that did not need to be performed. A few breaths returned to the room. Someone laughed too loudly, the fragile kind of laugh that begs the moment to move on. Cassandra exhaled as if she had righted a listing ship. She lifted her glass. "To legacy that evolves," she declared. The guests echoed the toast. I tasted the champagne cool and dry and watched the flame lines of the candles tremble as if the house itself had sighed. In the corner near the archway, Lucas stood with his phone held low. He did not look at me. He did not need to. He spoke softly into the receiver, turned his wrist, and nodded once. "It is done," he said to no one in particular, then slipped the phone into his jacket pocket and blended into the carved wood shadows. The servers advanced with the first course. Cameras clicked like quiet insects at the edges of the room, recording plates and smiles and the soft choreography of generosity. Cassandra began her welcome remarks, thanking sponsors, stylists, and her audience watching at home. She described the foundation as an evolving mission and called the evening a reintroduction to relevance. She did not use my name. She gestured toward the scholarship display near the mantel where portraits of past recipients stood beside framed letters of thanks. Her hand skimmed past the letters quickly as if they were no more than set dressing. The young donor smiled at her with visible admiration. I watched the cellist resume a gentle melody and felt the music fold around the table like a shawl, quieting the nerves that had spiked when Cassandra corrected me. When a server poured more champagne, Cassandra held out her phone for the camera to capture the cascade of bubbles while she narrated the tasting notes. The photographer from the Gazette took a step closer. Evelyn sipped and glanced at me again. I lifted my glass a fraction, a private reassurance. The room relaxed a shade. Conversation returned in soft ribbons. We moved through the first course and into the second, and with each plate, Cassandra found a way to position her narrative for the lens. She thanked the floral sponsor and the lighting designer and the table stylist, but not the gardener who had coaxed those lilies from the soil or the woman who had set this table for 30 years. It did not matter. The house remembered. During a lull, a server approached Cassandra. She asked for an extra case of champagne for a surprise toast and lifted her card with a flourish designed for the nearby photographer. The device chirped once. She kept her smile. The device chirped again. "Declined," the server said in a voice meant only for her. Cassandra did not blink. "Try again," she whispered, angling her shoulder to shield the exchange from the cameras. The device answered with the same quiet refusal. A thread pulled taut across the room. The cellist missed a note so lightly it might have been imagined. The clink of a fork ceased mid-air. I set down my glass and reached for water, not hurried, not slow. Cassandra's smile stiffened at the edges, the kind of strain only people who live on cameras can feel the battle between performance and panic. She leaned toward the server and handed over a second card from her clutch, the one embossed with her brand. The device denied it with the same simple tone. The server looked apologetic and stepped back. A murmur moved like a draft through the guests. I heard the word declined, float once, and then vanish, swallowed by polite throats. Cassandra's straightened cheeks flushed. She turned to me as if to draw a cue. I lifted my fork and met her eyes steady as a metronome. "Dessert is nearly ready," I said. The photographer lowered his camera an inch, uncertain. Cassandra nodded too quickly and thanked the room for their patience, as if the pause had been part of the program. She handed her phone to a planner with a tight instruction to start the next segment. The planner obeyed and signaled the kitchen. Plates of lemon soufflé appeared bright and fragrant, a small sun on porcelain. I cut into mine and let the steam rise the scent of citrus, clearing the last of the tension from the air. Across the table, Cassandra's soufflé remained untouched. She lifted her glass of water with a hand that trembled and then steadied it against the linen. She looked toward the archway and saw Lucas watching the servers. He did not meet her eyes. He did not need to. The house had learned a new note in its music. The guests resumed their conversation soft and civilized, as if the tide had found its shore again. I tasted the soufflé and thought of Thomas, who would have said that elegance is not a centerpiece but a boundary. Cassandra smiled for the room one more time, the smile of a woman who had discovered the edge of her stage. When she reached again for her card under the table, I knew what the machine would say before it spoke. Declined. The house exhaled its last guest with the slow rustle of silk and polite laughter. Outside, the rain had started fine, as mist glinting under the porch lights. I thanked the servers, gave Martha a nod to close the doors, and walked toward the library. The air carried the faint smell of lemon soufflé and champagne, now stale under the chandeliers. Cassandra's heels clicked behind me. She had stayed to bask in what she thought was triumph. I heard her phone buzz then again sharper. She stopped in the hall. The sound of a notification pierced the quiet. Another one followed. Her tone changed. "What the hell?" she whispered. I kept walking until I reached the open library door. She was staring at her phone, her face drained of color. "Your account has been temporarily restricted." She read aloud, disbelieving. She dialed a number with shaking hands. The voice of Lucas answered calm and steady. "Mr. Reed," she said, forcing a laugh. "There's been some mistake." My transfer didn't go through. His reply was polite, precise. "Please contact Mrs. Vale." He hung up before she could respond. I took a book from the shelf without looking at her. "You can't do this to me," she shouted, stepping inside, her voice rising against the walls lined with generations of books. "I didn't," I said quietly, turning a page. "You did." She blinked at me, not understanding her mascara beginning to smudge. "You froze my account." "No," I said, closing the book. "I froze indulgence." The fire crackled once, breaking the silence. She looked around the room as if searching for an ally. The portraits offered none. "You need to fix this," she demanded. "You've embarrassed me in front of everyone." I stood and walked to the window. Outside, guests were still saying their goodbyes near the driveway. "No Cassandra." I said, my voice even. "You embarrassed yourself." The words landed heavier than I expected. She took a step forward. "Do you even understand how cruel this looks online? People are going to talk." "Then let them," I said. "They always do." Behind her, a phone camera light flickered. Someone from the hallway had begun recording, drawn by the noise. She didn't notice. "You've destroyed my reputation," she said, her voice cracking. "You traded it for attention," I replied. "I'm just returning the exchange rate." Her lip trembled. She threw her phone onto a chair, the screen glowing where the email still read temporarily restricted. I walked past her, opened the door, and nodded toward the corridor. "Good night, Cassandra." She didn't move. The guests in the foyer pretended not to hear, but the tension was its own spectacle. A young donor stood frozen, his phone half raised. Martha caught his wrist, gently whispering something that made him lower it, but it was too late. One of the servers had already captured a few seconds of the confrontation. A voice whispered. She said, "You did. Did you hear that I closed the library door behind me?" Cassandra remained inside, sobbing quietly, the kind of sound that carries more confusion than sorrow. Upstairs, Ethan's door opened. "What's going on?" he called. "Ask your wife," I answered. He hesitated, then retreated. The house sank into stillness again. I climbed the stairs, the wood creaking under each deliberate step. In my room, the lamp glowed soft and golden. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my notebook. On the fresh page, I wrote April 6th lesson, delivered quietly. I closed it and turned off the light. The rain outside grew heavier, wrapping the house in its rhythm. Morning arrived with sunlight too bright for the mood it met. I woke to the sound of distant notifications pinging from the downstairs hall. Martha brought in the tray with coffee in her usual gentle tone. "It's already everywhere," she said, placing the cup on the table. "What is the video?" she replied. "It's trending on that app she uses. TikTok, I think they call it. Hashtag outdated no more." I sipped the coffee, tasting victory's bitterness. "And what does it show?" "Only a few seconds," she said. Her shouting. "You answering." "People say it looks dignified." "Good," I said. "Let it stay that way." She hesitated. "She hasn't come down yet." "She will," I said. "Hunger always finds the kitchen." Martha smiled faintly and left. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden. The white roses Cassandra had demanded were now browned and drooping. The rain had flattened the petals overnight. I thought about how quickly beauty collapses when it grows from vanity instead of care. My phone vibrated. A text from Lucas read, "Coverage everywhere. Trend positive. Financials secure." I replied with one word, "Excellent." Across the street, the church bells began to ring for Sunday service. I wondered if Cassandra would still attend. Reputation, after all, loves redemption stories. I poured another cup of coffee and watched the light climb through the magnolia trees. The house smelled of lemon polish again, like peace, returning after noise. Downstairs, a faint sound of movement told me she was awake. Would you record it or walk away, comment what you'd do? Monday morning began with the sound of the phone ringing before breakfast. The Charleston Gazette again this time, the reporter's tone cautious, deferential. "Mrs. Vale," he said, "I hope this isn't a bad time. There are rumors circulating about an account freeze involving your daughter-in-law. Is it true her financial privileges have been revoked?" I looked out the window toward the magnolia trees glistening with dew and said, "Grace's timeless entitlement isn't." He paused, waiting for elaboration. I gave him none. "That's all I have to say," I added gently and hung up. I could almost hear the click of his pen as he wrote it down, already turning my sentence into a headline. Martha entered with a fresh pot of tea and a folded newspaper. "They're already quoting you," she said. Page 2, the article's title read, "Old Money Values Clash with Modern Influence." Beneath it, Cassandra's photo appeared again, her face pale behind oversized sunglasses caught by paparazzi outside a boutique. The caption beneath it said, "No comment." At 10, Lucas arrived carrying a folder thick with receipts and statements. He placed it on the library desk without a word. "Everything you asked for," he said. I opened it and scanned the neatly printed lines. Spa visits totaling $47,000 in 6 months. Jewelry purchases of $22,000, handbags $18,000, designer shoes $15,000, travel expenses disguised as charitable outreach, another $34,000. The numbers spoke for themselves. "She spent a year's tuition for 4 students on handbags," I said quietly. A pattern, Lucas replied. Each charge linked to the foundation's account under public relations or event expenses. "The auditors will need this." I nodded. "Send copies to Mr. Havens at Grant and Pearl. Full transparency. I want every document reviewed by an independent office. If she accuses me of cruelty, she'll do it standing in front of the truth." Lucas smiled faintly. "You always did believe in documentation. Numbers don't argue," I said. By noon, the calls multiplied. First a local talk show host asking for a statement, then an old acquaintance pretending to check on my health but fishing for gossip. I kept my voice measured. "We're fine," I said each time. "The foundation is stronger than ever." By early afternoon, the story had spread online. Hashtags bloomed across social media like invasive flowers. Soares Grace's timeless trended beside outdated, no more. Cassandra's followers speculated wildly. Some defended her calling the freeze a generational misunderstanding. Others dissected her shopping lists as evidence of greed. The comments section became its own courtroom. At 3, Lucas returned. The auditors confirmed receipt, he said. They're impressed by your record keeping. I nodded, grateful but weary. This isn't pleasure, I said. It's maintenance. He handed me another document, a breakdown of how the foundation's donations were diverted into her brand partnerships. She used our scholarship outreach funds to sponsor her influencer retreats, flights, photographers, everything. I stared at the numbers again. She turned generosity into advertising. It happens more than you'd think, he said, but rarely so brazenly. I closed the folder. Send it all to the Gazette anonymously. Let them confirm what they started. Are you sure? Yes, I said. Public faith must be preserved, and she already chose the public arena. By evening, the Gazette website updated with a new headline. Exclusive audit reveals misuse of Vale Foundation funds. The article quoted unnamed sources, but the evidence was clear. Screenshots of transactions, itemized lists, photographs of luxury deliveries to Cassandra's address. My phone lit up with messages most unread. One came from Evelyn. You didn't leak this, did you? I replied. Transparency isn't leaking. It's light. At 7, I poured a glass of sherry and turned on the television. A national segment was covering the story, now framing it as a clash between generations, the old guard and the digital nouveau riche. They replayed my quote. Grace's timeless entitlement isn't. The anchor called it the soundbite of the week. I turned the volume down. Fame had never interested me, not when it arrived wearing the scent of scandal. Upstairs, Cassandra's voice echoed faintly from her room. She had gone live again, the same way she always did when cornered. I opened my laptop and watched the feed silently. Her face filled the screen, framed by streaks of mascara. I'm being punished for being modern, she said, her voice trembling. They think because I'm young and because I care about relevance that I'm wrong. But I was only trying to honor tradition in a way people my age understand. Thousands of comments scrolled past. Some offered sympathy. Others asked about the handbags. I didn't misuse anything, she continued. I built visibility for the foundation. Isn't that worth something? She wiped her eyes and forced a smile. They'll understand eventually. I closed the laptop. Lucas called again. It's gaining traction, he said. Her live stream reached 500,000 viewers in an hour. Let her talk, I said. Every word proves the point. And what point is that? That relevance without respect collapses under its own weight. He was quiet a moment. You're not angry, no, I said. I'm tired of watching good money teach bad lessons. Night settled over the city, the streets glowing under rain-polished lights. I walked through the house past the dining room still arranged from Easter. The candles had melted into pale puddles. The tablecloth smelled faintly of citrus. I thought of Thomas again, his voice the calm after storms. He would have handled this exactly the same way, quietly, with precision. In the mirror above the fireplace, my reflection looked older, but not fragile. Strength wears different clothes at 62. Sometimes it looks like restraint. The next morning, the foundation's inbox overflowed with messages from donors reaffirming their support. The Gazette ran another headline, Vale Foundation Audit Clears Board Confirms Funds Secured. Cassandra's name appeared only once, buried in the 5th paragraph, described as former communications consultant. That was how the world edits history subtraction by silence. I forwarded the article to Lucas and Ruth. Closure, I wrote. By afternoon, the reporters stopped calling. The air in the house felt lighter. Even the flowers seemed to recover their petals, opening again after days of scrutiny. I brewed tea and took it to the veranda. Martha joined me, folding her hands in her apron. The city's talking, she said. Mostly proud. They say you handled it with grace. I smiled faintly. Grace, I repeated. That word again. She nodded. Well, you gave it new meaning. I looked out toward the garden sunlight warming the wet leaves. No, I said softly. I just reminded them what it meant. Inside, my phone buzzed once more. It was a message from an unknown number, a single sentence that read, "You won't win forever." Cassandra. I thought, though, the tone sounded more desperate than threatening. I deleted it. Reputation dies slower than money, but dies all the same. I closed the veranda door and breathed in the quiet. Do you believe respect should come before relevance? Write yes if you agree. The backlash came faster than even Lucas predicted. Within 48 hours, the sponsors who once courted Cassandra's charm began releasing statements. We value integrity above all else. We are re-evaluating our partnerships. By Wednesday morning, her name had vanished from 3 major campaigns. The numbers told the story plainly. Her fan page lost 60% of its followers overnight. The comments shifted from adoration to analysis, then to accusation. She lived off charity funds. She used donor money for handbags. Grace's timeless entitlement isn't. My sentence had become a slogan without my intending it. It was printed on mugs, quoted in morning shows, even discussed on talk radio. They called it elegant vengeance. I didn't answer the phone when they asked for interviews. Silence was my statement now. Ethan arrived that evening, his jacket soaked from the drizzle. He stood in the doorway like a boy, again unsure whether he was welcome. Martha offered him a towel. "She won't speak to me," he said. "She's locked herself in her apartment." His voice trembled between anger and worry. "They're calling her a thief, Mom." "She spent what wasn't hers," I replied. "That isn't theft by accusation, it's theft by arithmetic." He sighed and rubbed his temples. "She's humiliated. Everyone's turned on her. Couldn't you just give her another chance?" I looked up from my papers. "I gave her 200,000 chances a year." He blinked, unprepared for the cold arithmetic of that truth. "She's my wife," he said. "Then teach her what partnership means," I said, "because she never learned it from the sponsorships she collected." He didn't argue. There are moments when silence is the only honest response between mother and son. Later that night, I walked past the parlor window. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the garden lights into watercolor. Across the street, reporters still lingered in cars, waiting for another glimpse of drama. The world has an appetite for aftermath. Cassandra gave them one. Paparazzi photos surfaced the next morning of her walking through the rain without an umbrella, her makeup washed into shadows. She wore a coat too thin for the weather, clutching her phone as if it might explain everything. The caption read, "Fallen Modern Muse." The comment section argued about sympathy. Some saw tragedy, others saw justice. I saw consequence. Martha showed me the paper with a small frown. "They're being cruel now," she said. "Cruelty sells better than remorse," I replied. I folded the newspaper neatly and placed it aside. She hesitated. "You could call her to say what I asked, that I warned her to say you care." I looked out the window again, watching the rain blur the city. "Justice isn't joy," I said. "It's just weight returning to where it belongs." The Foundation's board met that afternoon to finalize the transfer of communications back under official oversight. Lucas sat across from me, notes organized, glasses low on his nose. "Public opinion has stabilized," he said. "Donors are increasing pledges, not withdrawing. Ironically, your restraint is being praised as strategy." I gave a small smile. "Restraint is only strategy when people notice it." He nodded. "Do you feel sorry?" I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said finally. "I feel balanced." Outside the conference room, reporters still camped near the gates. They shouted questions about forgiveness, reconciliation, possible legal action. Lucas guided me toward the car. The air smelled of rain and magnolia again, the same mixture that had framed so many endings in my life. As the driver pulled away, I watched the iron gates close in the rearview mirror. They always close slower when someone's watching. That evening, I received another message from Ethan, a single sentence again. "She's leaving town for a while." I replied, "Then maybe she'll find herself somewhere money isn't a mirror." He didn't answer. I spent the rest of the night in the library reading old letters from Thomas. One line stood out: "Mercy is not softness, it's precision." I folded the letter and placed it beside the ledger where the last financial report rested. The ink from both looked the same shade of black. Justice and accounting often do. The next morning brought sunlight so clean it felt rehearsed. Birds returned to the garden, shaking droplets from the branches. The newspapers had moved on to another scandal, another face. That is how survival works in the modern world. People forget as fast as they condemn. The foundation staff resumed normal hours. The scholarships went out on time. The phones stopped ringing. I brewed tea and took it to the veranda, the cup warm against my palms. Martha joined me quietly. "Peaceful again," she said. For now I replied. Peace always takes someone's noise to earn it. Across the street, the mail carrier waved. I waved back. Inside the envelope he handed me was a note from one of the scholarship recipients, written in uneven handwriting. "Thank you for believing in me, Mrs. Vale," it said. "Your support changed my life." I smiled and placed it on the table beside the cooling tea. That was the currency that never devalued gratitude honestly earned. When Lucas called that afternoon for updates, he mentioned seeing Cassandra's photograph in a new article. "They're framing her as a cautionary tale now," he said. "The modern tragedy of entitlement." "Good," I said. "Maybe someone will learn something. Do you want me to forward it?" "No need," I answered. "I already know the ending." That night, as the sun sank over Charleston and the windows glowed gold, I stood once more by the dining room table. The same chair still waited at the head. I touched its carved armrest and whispered softly, "Not to Cassandra, not to the world, but to myself. Balance restored." Then I turned off the lights and left the room. A month later, the magnolias were glossy with heat, and the glass panes of the greenhouse fogged at the corners where morning met shade. I had taken to spending my first hour there among the citrus trees and the trellised jasmine, pruning in silence, letting the green repair what noise had tried to take. The door clicked, and shoes hesitated on the tile. I did not turn at first. I knew the cadence of her breathing, the way she held her breath when she was composing a performance and released it when she found her line. "Margaret," she said too softly for a camera, then louder, "Mother." I faced her. Cassandra stood at the threshold without makeup, hair pulled tight, a white dress clinging at the shoulders. The light through the glass made her look younger and also smaller, as if the body that had held so much certainty had misplaced it. She stepped forward and then lowered herself to her knees on the mosaic floor. The curve of the tile pressed into her skin, and she winced but did not stand. "I will be better," she said. "Please restore my account." The sentence cracked slightly on the word please. I set my pruning shears on the potting bench and wiped my hands on a cloth. "It was not an account, dear," I said. "It was respect in numbers." She looked up quickly as if the word respect were a rope she could still grab. "I did not steal," she said. "I mistook the rules." I was trying to keep the foundation alive in the way people listen now. Visibility is value. I nodded once. "You chose visibility over honesty and called it strategy." She reached for my hand and then stopped, as if the air between us were too hot. "I am sorry," she said. "I am truly sorry." The words sounded like she had tested them in mirrors, but never in bone. I knelt across from her so that our faces were level and the leaves framed us like a chapel. "What are you sorry for?" I asked. She blinked. "For spending carelessly, for letting the press twist the story, for not crediting you." "That is a list," she said quickly, "but it is not an answer." She swallowed. "For believing relevance could replace respect." "Better," I said, "but not complete." Her eyes flashed with something like anger and then flamed out into exhaustion. "They hate me now," she whispered. "The brands, the girls who used to call me queen. Even Ethan is distant. The city watches when I shop for bread. The cameras make pity look like guilt. You ruined me." I stood and reached for the watering can. "You filmed it yourself," I said. The truth is not a camera angle. She looked away toward the lemon trees where small green fruit had begun to show under the leaves. If you turn it back on, she said, I will sign whatever limits you want. Monthly reports, caps on spending. I will attend board meetings. I will learn the old way. I will be quiet when you speak. I watered the basil slowly. When women promise silence, it is usually because they have lost their microphone. She flinched. I am not a monster, she said. I did not know how to honor a house built before I was born. Teach me without punishing me. Consequence is not punishment, I said. It is a teacher that arrives when the lesson is late. She rose from her knees and began to pace a small, anxious circle that made the leaves shiver. I can fix this, she said. One interview. I will say I misunderstood. I will thank you. People love redemption. Yes, they do, I said. That is why redemption must be earned. She stopped. How much time then? A quarter? A year? What do I do until then? Work, I said. Not for yourself. For someone who cannot pay you back. Learn the weight of hours that do not translate into followers. She laughed once without humor. You want me to disappear. I want you to reappear as a person, not a product. She pressed her fingers to her temples and then let her hands fall. There were tears, but they were not the hysterical kind from her live streams. They were quiet, the kind that salt learning. Tell me what to sell, she said. The dresses, the bags, the jewelry. I will liquidate it all. If I hand you the cash, will you forgive me? I shook my head. Money cannot buy back what money broke. Then what can? Time. Service. Humility. Her mouth trembled. People will think you are cruel. They already think it. I said. They thought you were modern. That did not save you either. She tilted her face to the glass ceiling where a cloud moved across the sun and made the whole room dim for a breath. I am tired, she said. I do not know how to be anything but visible. Then learn how to be useful, I said. There is a shelter on Meeting Street that needs hands, not headlines. Go quietly. Give more hours than you think you can. Do it without telling anyone. She stared at me. And the allowance. I met her eyes. That word is finished. She looked as if I had closed a door in a fire. So that is it. It is never it, I said. It is simply not now. She swallowed again. If I fail, then you will have named your lesson and you will start again. She drew a breath that shook and then steadied. I can try, she said. Try is a word that sits down, I said. Do is a word that stands. She lifted her chin and nodded as if committing it to memory. The greenhouse had grown warmer. Somewhere outside, a bell marked the hour. I turned back to the potting bench and began to trim a wayward vine. Behind me, she spoke in the smallest voice I had ever heard from her. Will you ever forgive me? Forgiveness is a door, I said. I am not locking it. I am only asking you to build a key. She stood very still. Then she bowed her head not for a camera, but for gravity, and walked toward the exit. At the door she paused as if hoping I would call her back. I did not. Some mercies live in distance. She opened the door and stepped into the evening. I watched from the path as she crossed the lawn toward the main house. The moon was climbing over the oaks, and its light fell across the bronze statue of Thomas by the fountain. Water lifted and fell in the bowl with the same calm rhythm he used to keep in every storm. Cassandra glanced at the statue and then looked down quickly as if the metal eyes could judge. The moonlight caught the curve of his coat and turned it into a pale blade against the sky, legacy standing quiet beside vanity. She moved on. I returned to the lemon trees and breathed in the bitter, clean scent of their leaves. The night folded itself around the glass. In the reflection, I could see my own face next to Thomas, and for the first time since Easter, the house felt exactly the right size. 2 months later, summer pressed hard against the Charleston air, and everything smelled faintly of salt and magnolia. I'd almost stopped thinking about Cassandra until Martha walked into the breakfast room, holding her phone like it was carrying a secret. She posted again, she said. You should see it before everyone else does. I took the phone and watched the opening frame. Cassandra sat in a pale blue room that looked intentionally humble, hair tied back. No jewelry light soft as confession. The caption read, "I forgive my mother-in-law." Her voice came calm. "Practice deliberate." "Forgiveness," she said, "is harder than people think. It takes courage to let go of bitterness. I forgive Margaret Vale for what happened. I know she acted from her values. I acted from mine. And I believe time will heal what money and misunderstanding broke." She paused as if she expected applause. The video lasted 7 minutes. Within 3 hours, it reached 2 million views. By noon, the internet had divided itself into warring camps. Hashtags bloomed again. Dinar, Team Cassandra, and Team Margaret trended side by side like rival banners. The comments felt like courtroom transcripts. Some wrote, "She's taking the high road." Others answered, "Forgiveness without apology is performance." Martha read a few aloud before sighing. "They're arguing as if it's a sport," she said. "It always was," I replied. "She just changed teams." Lucas arrived that afternoon carrying his laptop and a look that mixed irritation with amusement. "She's getting traction," he said. "PR agencies are already contacting her for interviews. They're calling it the redemption wave." He set the laptop on the table and pressed play. Cassandra's face filled the screen again, this time framed by a quote graphic. The headline read, "Cassandra Vale forgives, publicly hints at reconciliation." Lucas muted the sound. "Would you like to respond?" he asked. I poured tea slowly. "No," I said. "Silence will trend longer." He smiled. "That's colder than a press release." "It's not cold," I said. "It's measured. Noise eventually burns itself out." For the next week, the city buzzed. Reporters parked again near the gates, waiting for a new headline. Ethan called twice but did not leave messages. On the third day, Martha mentioned seeing Cassandra at a charity luncheon downtown. "She looked thinner," Martha said. But she smiled for every camera. "Survival has a shape," I replied. "Hers just happens to be cinematic." Late one evening, I received an envelope without a return address. Inside was a glossy print of Cassandra on stage at a women's conference standing before a banner that read, "Reclaiming Respect." Below it, in elegant script, her quote, "I learned that forgiveness is the loudest silence." I set the photo aside and returned to the ledger I had been reviewing for the foundation. The accounts for the new Orphan Scholarship Fund were nearly complete. Only one transfer remained. I wrote a check for $10,000 and addressed it to St. Augustine Home for Children, signing only anonymous donor. "Justice must feed someone," I whispered. The next morning, Lucas called again. "They want to feature you in an editorial rebuttal," he said. "The Gazette is offering the front page." "No," I said. "Let them debate with themselves." "You're aware," he continued carefully, "that silence can also be interpreted as guilt." "Only by those who need noise to feel clean," I answered. By the end of that week, the metrics began to shift. Cassandra's followers rose again, but the engagement flattened. People had moved on to newer scandals. Her forgiveness campaign was already being replaced by another influencer's apology tour. Fame was quicksand pretending to be spotlight. One night near the end of July, I walked through the garden under the heavy air of a coming storm. The fountain gurgled softly beside Thomas's statue, and in the reflection of its water, I could see the ghost of our younger years. Two people who built something steady in a city obsessed with display. Cassandra's voice drifted faintly from an open laptop inside the parlor window, where Martha had left the news playing. "We must learn to love without condition," she was saying, "even when hurt runs deep." I closed the laptop. Even kindness can rot when it's rehearsed too long. A few days later, I attended a small community event at the old parish hall. The pastor thanked the Vale Foundation for funding repairs to the roof. A little girl with missing front teeth handed me a bouquet of daisies and said, "My mom says thank you for the scholarship." I smiled and bent to her level. "Tell her to pay it forward," I said. The child nodded solemnly as if she understood the full weight of those words. That moment was worth more than any headline. When I returned home, there was a note on the doorstep written in Cassandra's elegant cursive. "Thank you for teaching me value," it read. "You were right about work. I am volunteering now. One day, I hope we can speak again. No signature, only a faint trace of perfume." I folded it once and placed it between the pages of my husband's old journal. The gesture mattered more than its accuracy. Lucas called again the next morning. "The internet's quiet now," he said. "No more wars between teams." "Good," I said. "Let peace have a turn at trending." He laughed softly. "You always know the line that ends the chapter." "There are no chapters," I said, "only pages that learn to stop bleeding." That night, as the storm finally broke over Charleston, I sat by the window watching the rain cut silver threads across the streetlights. Martha brought tea and asked, "Do you think she meant what she wrote?" I watched the glass tremble under the thunder. "Meaning takes time," I said. "But at least she's facing the mirror." I went to my desk and sealed another envelope for the St. Augustine home this time, enclosing an additional donation. 10,000 more unrecorded, unannounced. Justice is not complete until it feeds more than pride. I imagined the children there, the sound of laughter echoing through repaired halls, the way real gratitude doesn't need an audience. Outside, the thunder softened into rain. The clock in the hallway marked the hour with a low chime. I closed the ledger, blew out the candle, and let the darkness settle. The city would wake tomorrow with new gossip, new outrage, and forget this story the way people always do. But the quiet I had chosen would stay. It was the kind that built instead of burned. Would you forgive if she humiliated you publicly? Let me know. August in Charleston carries a heat that glows rather than burns, a soft gold laid over the city like lacquer. And the summer gala took that glow and polished it until the chandeliers looked like captured suns. The ballroom at the historic hotel breathed a cooler air that smelled of gardenias and old wood, the kind of scent that makes donors generous and photographers kind. The banner at the far end read, "Charleston Woman of the Year," and beneath it the lectern waited with a glass of water and a card bearing my name. People I had known for decades moved in gentle currents, men in dinner jackets, women in silk the color of the harbor at dusk. The orchestra tried a standard and then another, and conversation rearranged itself into little islands of admiration and anticipation. I stood near the wings with Lucas and the event director while Martha adjusted a small clasp on my sleeve. She whispered that I looked like Thomas would have wanted me to look calm and unarguable. I smiled at that and let my breath even out to the rhythm of the strings. Across the room, I noticed a subtle shift in the air, the kind of hush that creeps in when an old chapter walks back into a new room. Near the rear wall, half shadowed by a column, Cassandra stood alone. No ring light, no entourage, no jewelry that wanted to be seen. She had chosen a simple black dress and a stillness that almost worked. For a moment, I saw the girl she might have been if applause had never taught her to confuse noise with love. Our eyes did not meet. They did not need to. She stayed where the carpet met the marble and clasped her hands like a visitor in a chapel. The program began. A city councilwoman described the history of the award. Then a former scholarship recipient told a story about a first semester paid for by kindness that had felt like a miracle. The audience clapped not loudly but honestly. When they called my name, the sound folded into something warmer. I felt the floor under my heels the way a sailor feels a deck under a steady tide. Lucas pressed my speech card into my hand and stepped back. I crossed to the lectern, set down the card, and looked at the room that had watched me age into myself. The first words came as breath, more than sound. "Thank you." I never planned for a spotlight. I only planned for ledgers that balanced, and students who did not have to choose between tuition and lights. The crowd smiled, many of them nodding, because the only wealth that stays is the kind you give away until it has your shape. I spoke about Charleston, about the way the city can polish and cut in the same motion, and about how tradition survives only when it remembers who it is serving. Then I felt the speech turn toward the sentence that had been growing in me since Easter. I did not rush it. I let it arrive like tidewater over sand. Some things do go out of style. Entitlement is one of them. The line landed with the soft force of a bell. For a heartbeat, the room went very still, and then it rose in applause that was not frantic, but firm, the kind that says, "We know exactly what you mean, and we have been waiting to say it with you." Cameras pivoted in a synchronized whisper. I could see lenses catch my face, then tilt and travel down the center aisle past donors, past city officials, past women whose pearls had outlived 3 mayors, and settle at the edge of the rear column where Cassandra stood with her hands still folded. The spotlight did not find her, but every eye that had learned to follow trouble did. She did not flinch. She did not leave. She looked for once like a person absorbing a sentence rather than dodging it. I finished the address with a story about a boy from North Charleston who used our emergency fund to buy a used laptop and now sends me emails signed with the name of his graduate lab. I thanked the board, the staff, and the city that had given me more second chances than I deserved. I closed the card and rested my palms on the wood. When I looked down from the dais, I found Ethan in the 4th row. He did not look worried or divided. He looked like a son who had just located a compass. The smile he gave me was small, and it was enough. The applause softened and stretched into a standing wave, and I stepped back as the orchestra lifted into something bright. The event director reached for my elbow and guided me down to the photo line, where an efficient woman arranged honorees against a backdrop that said the name of the charity 3 times, so no camera angle could forget it. Flash after flash opened and closed like quiet lightning. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the shadow near the column shift, and then still. Cassandra had not moved forward to be seen. She had not left to be spared. She had chosen witness over performance. For her, that counted as progress. A reporter asked whether I had meant the line as a message. I answered that I meant it as a mirror. If we do not want to see ourselves, we call mirrors cruel. Lucas chuckled under his breath and told the reporter that the foundation would be releasing its annual report with expanded scholarships next week. He always knows how to move a story from personality back to purpose. The orchestra eased into a waltz, and couples began to circle the floor. I stepped aside to let the music breathe. Near the doors, a volunteer coordinator I admire handed me an envelope from the orphan home acknowledging a donation that did not carry a name. I tucked it into my clutch without opening it. There are receipts you keep only in your heart. When the evening thinned and people began to drift toward the bar for the last cordial, I permitted myself to look toward the back one more time. The column was just a column again. Cassandra had gone without leaving a line behind her. That also counted as progress. I stood for a while at the edge of the dance floor watching the city congratulate itself, and for once deserving it. The chandeliers hummed their soft electrical hymn. The gardenias near the windows gave up the last of their scent to the air. Somewhere beyond the ballroom glass, the harbor turned its slow, dark shoulder toward the moon. I touched the rim of the award in my hand and felt nothing sharp, only weight that belonged to me. Would you have said that line if you were her yes or no? A year later, Charleston had settled into a quieter rhythm, the kind that follows a storm once everyone has learned to live with what was washed away. The garden behind the house bloomed again with order and color rows of lilies where the soil used to be raw. I had renamed the foundation in the spring. The Vale Scholars no longer existed by that title. The new name stood freshly engraved on the bronze plaque outside the gate, the Lesson Fund. The decision had not been sentimental but deliberate. Lessons, after all, outlive legacies. They travel lighter and cost less pride. The city papers had written their polite approval, calling it a modern gesture of renewal, but I knew it was simply a confession wrapped in philanthropy. Cassandra had written twice since the gala brief letters without pretense. The last one arrived in May, a note in clear handwriting that said she had joined a nonprofit organization working with women who had been financially manipulated by partners or family members. She was serving as a volunteer PR coordinator, helping them tell their stories without shame. The irony was not lost on either of us, but irony, like consequence, can be a useful teacher. She wrote that the work made her quiet, that she finally understood what it meant to account for time instead of money. I believed her not because her words demanded it, but because they carried no performance, no perfume, only paper and pen. Ethan visited more often now. He tended to the property on weekends, pruning the hedges his father once favored, repainting the porch rails, bringing fresh coffee when mine had gone cold. He had changed, too, not visibly, but in tone, the kind of change that happens when guilt stops shouting and starts thinking. We rarely spoke about Cassandra. Sometimes he would mention her in passing, saying she seemed calmer, more grounded, as if humility were finally fitting her like a coat, tailored late but right. I would nod, not in approval but in acceptance. Healing does not need applause. One afternoon in June, Lucas stopped by with his usual stack of reports and that soft humor that makes gravity tolerable. He found me in the library, sorting old files into boxes for the archive. He stood beside the window and watched the dust lift in the light. "You really are letting go of the old world," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm filing it under lessons learned." He smiled and handed me an envelope. The auditors sent their final review, flawless as always. Inside the folder was a short note from the board thanking me for a year of extraordinary stability. Stability, I thought, is just another word for peace when you've earned it. Before leaving, Lucas placed a smaller envelope on the desk. "A letter came for you," he said, "from the Foundation's new interns. They found one of your speeches online." He hesitated, as if reading it himself might have been intrusive. "You should see what they quoted." I opened it after he left. Inside was a simple card with the sentence written in uneven print, "Justice restores balance, not hatred." Beneath it, the interns had signed their names and drawn a small scale of justice, tipped evenly in the middle. I traced the ink with my thumb. Thomas would have liked that, I thought. He always said the hardest math is moral math, and that balance isn't symmetry, it's fairness with patience. That evening, the sun melted over the marshes, painting the water the color of forgiveness. I sat on the veranda with a cup of tea and listened to the cicadas warm their endless hymn. From the far side of the garden came Ethan's voice calling good night before he drove home. Inside, Martha folded linens for donation, humming an old gospel tune. The house felt lighter, not because anything was gone, but because nothing was pretending to be more than it was. I took out my journal, the one I had begun the night Cassandra's card first declined. Between the pages lay the clipped headline from the Gazette, the award program from the gala, and now the intern's note. I wrote one final entry beneath them. "Peace is not the absence of memory, but the refusal to weaponize it. It restores what revenge can only imitate." When the last light faded from the room, I walked to the mirror above the mantel and met the reflection that had aged with me through every quiet war. They called me outdated once I whispered. Now they call me timeless. Would you have done the same or forgiven her sooner? Comment below, I'm curious.